We'll now begin the urgent question. Shadow Foreign Secretary, Dame Priti Patel.
Deputy Speaker, to ask the Secretary of State for the FCDO if she'll make a statement on the British government's response to the brutal crackdown on the protests by the Iranian regime.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the United Kingdom condemns, in the strongest of terms, the horrendous killing of Iranian protesters and the most brutal and bloody repression against public protest in Iran for at least 13 years. The Iranian authorities must immediately end the abhorrent killings and uphold the human rights and fundamental freedoms of Iran's citizens, including the rights to freedom of expression, to seek, receive and impart information, and the freedom of association and peaceful assembly, without fear of reprisal. The Iranian security forces must be held accountable for the deliberate use of violence that has claimed thousands of lives. On the 13th of January, the Foreign Secretary was clear in her statement to this House and delivered that message directly to the Iranian Foreign Minister. The Prime Minister has issued a joint statement alongside the Chancellor of Germany and the President of France. On the 15th of January, alongside our G7 partners, we strongly condemned Iran and announced our readiness to oppose additional restrictive measures if Iran continues to crack down on protests and dissent in violation of their international human rights obligations. We publicly called out Iran's crackdown at the UN Security Council meeting on the 15th of January, and we have now secured a special session of the Human Rights Council in Geneva, which will take place on the 23rd of January. On the 13th of January, I summoned the Iranian ambassador to underline the gravity of this moment and to call on Iran to answer for the horrific reports that we have heard. On the 1st of October, Madam Deputy Speaker, alongside our E3 partners France and Germany, the UK implemented snapback in full by reinstating the 6 previously terminated United Nations sanctions resolutions on Iran. We're going further by bringing forward legislation to implement more sectoral measures. We have already designated key players in Iran's oil, energy, nuclear and financial systems, and further measures will target finance, energy, transport and other significant industries. We will continue to work with the European Union and our other partners to explore what additional measures might be needed in response to these most recent developments.
Shadow Foreign Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, since last week's statement, we're seeing more information about the horrific brutality the despotic regime in Tehran has inflicted and the bloodshed they are responsible for against their own citizens. Reports from medics in country are saying that the figure could be as high as 18,000 men, women and children dead, slaughtered in cold blood. Reports also suggest that up to 360,000 people could be injured, with those wounded left dying due to shortages of blood in hospital. This is an affront to humanity, and there must be accountability, including for the use of execution show trials. The regime is one of the most consistently vile and brutal in the world, and the government cannot stand by, and we need to understand what more they are doing in response to the latest barbaric revelations and actions. So what is the government's assessment of the numbers killed and injured and the brutal tactics used by the regime? What do they make of reports that the regime may have used chemical weapons in the recent attacks on its own civilians? What assessment has been undertaken of those imprisoned and being tortured? The principal victims of this vile regime are the Iranian people themselves. What did their ambassador say when he was summoned last week at the Foreign Office? And what did their foreign minister say when he was called by the Foreign Secretary? Once again, Madam Deputy Speaker, protesters in Iran seek freedom from tyranny, and the response from the West just has been shameful as Iranians have been slaughtered. Iran continues to pose a threat to us all and our interests with their sponsoring of terrorism and their nuclear program. The US State Department remarked on Saturday that it had heard reports that the Islamic Republic is preparing options to target American bases. Given that Britain has many joint military bases with the US in the region, what is being done to secure those assets? What is the latest assessment on Iran's nuclear enrichment program and ballistic missile capability? And what is being done to strip Iran of those weapons? And with phase 2 of the Gaza peace plan being implemented, what is being done to stop Iranians' sponsorship of Hamas and other terrorist groups undermining the efforts to secure peace in the region? This is not a time to be timid, as the response to these continued atrocities continues to be shamefully muted.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady asks important questions. Let me turn first off to the question of numbers. I do not want to give the House an artificial sense of precision when the internet remains restricted since the 8th of January. There clearly have been many deaths. We believe them to be in their thousands. We will not put a more precise figure on it at this time, because to do so would be at risk of misleading the House that we have a more precise picture than we do. That does not in any way take away from the strength of our condemnation. A variety of rationales have been provided by the Iranian regime, both in private and in public. They have claimed that they were responding to armed protesters. They have complained that others are seeking to interfere in their internal affairs. Let me be absolutely clear. There is no excuse for the scale of bloodshed that we have seen in relation to these protests. And it is not to seek to interfere in Iran's internal affairs to say that those protesters have rights, rights of assembly, rights to protest, and rights to have their internet turned back on.
Chair of the Select Committee, Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know that the Minister shares with me, and probably most of the House, a deep affection for the Iranian people, for their beautiful country and their extraordinary culture, which makes the killing that we have seen, the terrible violence that we have seen, even worse than we could possibly imagine. But the question I want to ask the Minister is this: can he give the House confidence that Britain and the international community will not now abandon the Iranian people out of geopolitical expediency?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we will not. The Iranian people, as I said in my answer to the Shadow Foreign Secretary, have rights. They are rights that we hold dear in this place. They are rights we hold dear in this country, and we will continue to press these points with the Iranian regime.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since the Foreign Secretary's statement last week, Ayatollah Khamenei has confirmed the death of thousands of protesters. Yet he has again deflected responsibility for the brutal crackdown by his regime. The Foreign Secretary told the House last week that sanctions against the leaders of the regime and the prescription of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps relied upon new legislation or instruments. We have waited too long for this. Will the Minister today give the House a date by which this will be introduced? Can the Minister give an update on internet connectivity? What is the UK doing with our partners to help restore internet access so that people in Iran can communicate and so that evidence can be gathered to hold the regime to account? And finally, what dialogue have ministers or officials had since last week about the Liberal Democrat proposal to pursue through the United Nations an International Criminal Court investigation into crimes against humanity perpetrated by the regime?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure my Liberal Democrat colleague knows that the processes of the ICC are independent of the decisions of ministers here, and rightly so. Turning to his other questions, Madam Deputy Speaker, you will know better than anyone. I won't presume to dictate dates in which the House might pass legislation. I can confirm that we are progressing that legislation at pace. I'd just like to say a little bit about the impact of the sanctions that we have introduced, including most recently. I know the House is aware that we now have over 550 sanctions on Iran. Most recently, in October, we sanctioned the IRGC financier Ali Ansari. As an indication of the scale and the efficacy of our sanction regime, I'm pleased to confirm to the House that has led to the freezing of over £100 million worth in UK property. There is exposure from Iran to the UK, and we will take every step required.
Dan Carden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We must not be indifferent to the pleas of the Iranian people. What we're seeing is absolutely horrific, and I welcome sanctions, but we have to be honest. Sanctions are unlikely to change the behaviour of this brutal, murderous regime. The people of Iran are fighting for their freedom. It's possible that the US may still intervene. And can he reassure me that the UK government is thinking about how it can offer meaningful support to the people in Iran who are fighting for their freedom?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've set out the position that we are taking in relation to these issues. I would not wish to give the impression to the House that those protesters are not at risk. Clearly they are, and we've seen the devastating consequences of regime behaviour in the most recent days. We will do everything that we can to ensure that the rights of those protesters are protected, and we're discussing closely with our allies what steps we can take.
Sir David Davies.
This is a despicable regime that goes in for state terrorism both at home and abroad. Its principal instrument of its terrorism abroad is the IRGC. This is now the 6th time I've called on Prime Ministers and Ministers. When are we going to proscribe the IRGC? The excuse historically given is we want to keep our embassy open. It's now shut, demonstrating quite how futile this argument is. When are we going to proscribe this terrorist organisation?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to be clear about the status of our embassy in Tehran. While it is true that we have withdrawn our staff, we have not closed our embassy. I expect that the embassy will be fully functional again soon, I hope, with some of this behind us. The questions around the IRGC, which I know the Right Honourable Gentleman has raised on a number of occasions, as have others in the House. We conducted the Jonathan Hall review. Jonathan Hall found that it is important that we have a tool that is focused on the particularities of the threats from Iran and the IRGC. That is a different threat from that which emanates from a simple terrorist group, if I may use that language. We're committed to taking forward those recommendations through the creation of a straight threats prescription-like tool, and we'll be coming back for parliamentary time to do that.
Dame Annalise Dodds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Chillingly, the head of the Iranian judiciary has publicly called for the acceleration of executions of protesters. The killing in Iran is not stopping. Last week, when the Foreign Secretary talked of further sanctions and sectoral measures, she linked those to the nuclear industry. Can I please ask the Minister now to confirm that the UK will be seeking to go further than sanctions applied in relation to nuclear issues, to also seek to impose them on human rights grounds for those who have been linked with this brutal Iranian regime? Thank you.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I pay tribute to my right honourable friend who's got considerable experience in these matters. She is right to differentiate between the snapback-related sanctions, which are in progress and which the Shadow Foreign Secretary and I have corresponded on recently. We are also, I can confirm, separately considering human rights sanctions in relation to the abuses that we've seen.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think many of us will have read the reports in the Sunday Times yesterday, which detailed about how IRGC forces burnt alive so many, machine gunned down so many, and this isn't happening in just one town or one city, but right across Iran. We have very few levers in this country to make a difference, but one of them is to prescribe the IRGC. Please, Minister, just do it and make some small difference to send a clear message and make the Iranian people understand that we stand with them.
Madam Deputy, I don't have a great deal to add to the answer I've already given to the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite, but I would say we are under no illusions about the threat that the IRGC pose. The Right Honourable Gentleman talks about what they are doing in Iran. Nobody on this side of the House has lost track of the fact that there have also been more than 20 plots linked to Iran, linked to the IRGC in this country as well. That is why it's so important to us that we have a tool focused on the particularities of a state-based threat rather than treating them just as terrorists.
James Nash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The world has been appalled by the scenes of bloodshed that we have seen. Can I ask the Minister to outline what discussions the government is having with our G7 colleagues and European colleagues to make sure that we send out a united message of condemnation and a common demand for the rights of the Iranian people to be respected?
Minister.
I can confirm to the House that both the Foreign Secretary and I have been in extensive discussions over the last few days, and I expect those to continue this week, including at Davos.
Monica Harding.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Iranian government is massacring civilians. Brave and young protesters are risking their lives for freedom and dignity against a violent and corrupt regime, and the Minister has spoken about the thousands that we fear have lost their lives, and the Times are reporting that up to 16,000 people may have died, and this in darkness, in an age when we can see news as it happens in the palm of our hands. We see nothing because of the internet crackdown. So what is the government doing to support internet access across Iran so that we can collect evidence to hold the perpetrators to account for this brutality? Mr.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady asks important questions. We are working with our allies and we continue to press the Iranians, both in public and in private. They must restore internet access.
Jim Chionwara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The brutal regime in Iran has destroyed so many lives, and as a woman and as a feminist, I want to pay particular tribute to the brave women of Iran fighting for their freedom against such odds. They were promised support by President Trump. Can the Minister say what form that support may take and what involvement the UK may or may not have, and whether it is dependent on executions taking place? And on the technical front, can he write to me in my role as the chair of the Technology Select Committee and explain exactly how the Iranian regime was able to turn off access to the internet? Do they have some switch somewhere? And what, with our unique technical expertise, the UK is doing to address that?
I just want to join with the Honourable Lady in her comments about the bravery of the protesters. I'm sure we've all seen pictures of incredibly courageous protesters, often young women, showing defiance against a regime clearly deeply intent on not only stopping the protests but silencing the voices and ensuring that nobody can see them. They are admirable people asserting their rights. It is clearly an inalienable right of the Iranian people to be able to protest, and that is what we want to see. I am happy to write to the Honourable Lady, though I will, for reasons she understands, not be able to delve too deeply into technical questions where they are sensitive.
David Reed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Does the Minister's Department assess that the Iranian regime can come back from this and go into a position of strength? And if so, does he assess that the sanctions packages that are being put forward now are enough to limit that from happening?
Mr.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful for the opportunity to set out our position on the future of Iran. That is clearly a matter for the Iranian people. What we are pressing, what we are focused on, is the Iranian authorities ensuring their people can exercise their right to peaceful protest. What happens next is clearly a question for the Iranian people, not for London, not for Washington, but for the Iranian people themselves. That is a message we have delivered consistently to the Iranian regime. They are saying otherwise, publicly particularly, and I'm grateful for him giving me the opportunity to set that out from the dispatch box so clearly.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Trump administration initially indicated that they would protect protesters when they came out, and came out they have done. Droves have come out, but of course, as many others have indicated, there are thousands upon thousands who are now being killed. I know we worry about outside interference, but if you listen to a lot of these protesters, they are of course actually demanding some help from outside. And I don't want to be standing, I'm sure the rest of us don't want to be standing here in a few years' time where we look back and we think, what if, given that we've just gone through the Syria civil war where 500,000 died when a simple, well not simple, but a straightforward no-fly zone could have protected them from being killed. So could I urge ministers to keep absolutely everything on the table and to talk to partners about what possible ways we might be able to degrade the IRGC's abilities to be killing thousands of protesters, because I don't think it's going to stop.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his continued commitment to these issues and indeed to those in Syria, which he's been engaged in for some time. As I said earlier, we are deeply concerned about the use of violence against protesters. We strongly condemn the killings of protesters, and they must be able to exercise their right to peaceful protest without fear of reprisal.
Alicia Kearns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are reports the US is planning airstrikes or action in Iran. Following the US's last airstrikes in Iran, in response they fired rockets at Al Udeid air base in Qatar. Now that is co-located, that base, which is recently partly evacuated, with the prison in Qatar, where Matthew Pascoe is being detained. So can the government please advise the House what they are doing to make sure that Matthew Pascoe will be safe and any British nationals who may be in the nearby area, but also what is being done to ensure the safety of the Foremans who continue to be held in Evin prison. And we know in the past that Iranians often will seek to overthrow the prisons rightly because of all those who are being held unjustly there.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady asked a series of important questions. On our general posture in the region, I don't want to comment in great detail about force protection questions in relation to our bases, though I'm sure she'll be aware of reports. We're working closely with our American counterparts on those questions. In relation to those detained, both the Foremans and others, I can confirm I've been in touch with the families. They're very much at the foremost of our minds. I must, however, draw the House and the public's attention to our travel advice. With the embassy withdrawn, there is a limit to what can be done. We cannot offer a full consular package of assistance in Iran. This is a fast-moving situation. We try to keep our travel advice as up-to-date as possible to reflect the very latest developments.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For almost 50 years, Iranians have found refuge in the UK, and many have made their homes in West London. One wrote to me saying that even after 20 years, Iran still runs through his veins. So could the Minister outline how the government is working with the Iranian diaspora in the UK to provide support and reassurance to them and also to their families still in Iran? Thank you.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I know how many families in the UK will feel very personally affected by developments in Iran. Of course, where there are consular-related questions, that is very much on our minds, both dual nationals and mono-nationals. In relation to wider community concerns, I'm afraid it's a question for MHCLG.
Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My British Iranian residents are deeply worried about their families, and the Minister has said that he hopes the embassy will reopen soon, but time isn't on the side of the Iranian people. So when is soon likely to be, and how quickly should we be expecting the prescription of the IRCG?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't want to sound evasive either about the delicate decisions that we need to make about posture across the region or indeed about parliamentary time, but I'm afraid I'm not able to be drawn any further on either.
Rachel Blake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The last few weeks I've been inundated with communication from constituents who are part of the Iranian diaspora. It is very difficult to convey the extent of their agony about the lack of contact with their family and the fear that they feel for their loved ones. They have said to me they really want to see the strongest possible action on sanctions, and they want to see the fastest possible progress on prescribing the IRGC. I've listened carefully to what the Minister had to say about the particularities of state-backed terror. I would ask him now to set out in some more detail about why he believes that that will take some further time in order that we can actually tackle this vile state-backed terror that is affecting us all so much.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend both for the question and I know the care she puts into these issues in her constituency. The Jonathan Hall review sets out some of the reasons why, in his view, a state-focused prescription-like tool is necessary. We accept those recommendations and we intend to legislate.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There appears, and in fact there is, a shared horror across the chamber at the killing of protesters in Iran, just as there is a shared condemnation of this brutal regime, just as it appears that there is a shared view that the IRGC should be prescribed. Now, I've listened carefully to the Minister's answers, but I would gently suggest to him that he has a consensus, and he should use that consensus to prescribe the IRGC as soon as possible to send that clear message to the Iranian people that we stand with them.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman's points are well noted. Just for the clarity of the House, the legislation will be Home Office rather than Foreign Office legislation, but I'll certainly pass on the strength of his feeling to the Security Minister.
Alex Serval.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard is undertaking and leading, actually, the brutal repression and murder of so many Iranians fighting for their freedom. But we know that the IRGC used 2 registered cryptocurrency exchanges to move approximately $1 billion since 2023, evading international sanctions. ZSX and ZCON routed funds between IRGC-controlled wallets, offshore intermediaries and Iranian crypto companies. What's the government doing to ensure that the IRGC cannot be funding this brutal crackdown through British-based companies?
Minister.
If my honourable friend writes to me, I'm happy to provide a more detailed answer in writing, but clearly our sanctions regime is wide-ranging and any British companies would need to be taking very careful attention to it. It sounds, on the face of it, like this would not be consistent with our arrangements, but please, if you write to me, then I'll respond.
Dr Andrew Merriton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister and I share a dubious distinction, that is, having summoned Iranian ambassadors, but does not agree with me whether it's Ambassador Mousavi or Ahmadinejad or Abbas Araghchi. It doesn't really matter because they're not the problem. The problem is the IRGC and its constituent parts. And will he accept that Jonathan Hall KC's review is not particularly controversial? He makes recommendations that would effectively get around the problem he has around prescription of state actors. There's cross-party agreement, and agreement right across this House that would get this measure through in a day. And it's not as if we don't have enough time, as today's cancellation of business has shown.
Minister.
I'm wounded, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the comparison to be dubious. On time, I would gently say to my predecessor that there was rather a lot of time. Glad to see the Foreign Secretary in his place. There was rather a lot of time over the last 14 years to pass these things, but we've done the whole review and we're committed to implementing it.
Gareth Snell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the brutal regime in Iran is well known to be attacking its own people at home, but it also poses one of the largest credible threats to Jewish people here in the UK. And as the regime is currently blaming Israelis and Jews and Zionists for being responsible for the protests, can the Minister set out what discussions are happening across government to make sure that those proxies and agents that we know are in the UK are being monitored to make sure that the Jewish population in the UK don't feel the backlash as a result of the protests in Iran?
Minister.
I have said repeatedly in no uncertain terms, as has the Foreign Secretary, to our Iranian counterparts, that any threat in the UK to British people of any faith or denomination in any building, and indeed any other diplomatic premises in the UK, will be treated with the utmost seriousness. I've reiterated that strength of feeling to a range of representatives from the Jewish community in the UK, and I'm happy to reiterate it again from the dispatch box.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Yeah. Last Tuesday afternoon, President Trump took a short break from attacking America's NATO allies to write on Truth Social the following: Iranian patriots, keep protesting, take over your institutions, adding, help is on its way. Has the government the faintest idea of what he was talking about?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, US posture and policy towards Iran is, I'm afraid, a matter for the US government.
Dr Peter Prinsley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many in this House are concerned about the malign influence of the Ayatollahs in our own country. There has been dreadful slaughter on the streets of Iran, but curiously little protest on the streets of Britain. What a contrast to the regular protests, sometimes intimidatory to local Jewish people, about the terrible war in Israel and Palestine. Could the aforementioned malign influence explain this?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Home Secretary has said, we are aware of the very considerable concern that the ongoing protests have caused, particularly in places of real sensitivity outside synagogues, etc., and we're taking measures to address it.
Dr. Al Pinkerton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. At the weekend, I visited several Iranian-owned businesses in my community to show my support and solidarity. And what those business owners told me was that they have relatives inside Iran who are going to extreme and increasingly extreme lengths in order to pick up information from the outside world due to the internet shutdowns, travelling close to the border with Iraq to pick up a mobile phone signal, or travelling across towns in order to connect to the kind of community-owned Starlink network. They expressed their frustration at the lack of activity as they see it from the British government, but also fears that the US government have marched protesters up to the top of the hill and have left them abandoned there. So can I ask the Minister, what coordination has he had with our, if I can still call them this, American allies about their approach, and are we aligned with them on what we are doing in Iran?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I understand the degree of anxiety within Iran. The restriction of the internet since the 8th of January is obviously a source of real concern, both to clearly Iranians in Iran, to those with family links there, and of course to those few but nonetheless profoundly affected British families who have loved ones detained, who are also suffering from these restrictions. As I said earlier, clearly US policy and posture towards Iran is a matter for them, but we are in close consultations and discussions with our American and indeed other counterparts.
David Pinter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I share the Minister's horror at the brutal repression we have seen in Iran. Hendon is home to a large and vibrant Iranian community, and we are all horrified beyond words to see the savage, murderous violence being meted out by the Iranian regime against protesters. But is not the reality that, even when there aren't protests in the street, the regime is engaged in industrial levels of violence against its own people, with executions in Iran more than doubling in the last year alone? Does the Minister agree with me that we must keep up the pressure on the Iranian regime to end this barbarity once and for all and let the Iranian people exercise their fundamental rights?
I do. We've spoken in some detail about the current events in relation to the protesters, but I can also confirm to the House that we oppose any and all executions in Iran, as we do across the world.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As thousands of brave Iranian protesters are slaughtered on the streets of Iran, I was humbled yesterday to speak in front of thousands of wonderful Iranians here in Whitehall, and they asked me to ask the government a simple question. How much more will it take this government to do the right thing and prescribe the terror group, the IRGC, and while they're at it, prescribe the Muslim Brotherhood?
Minister.
I'm grateful to my Lincolnshire colleague for the question. I don't have a great deal more to add on the IRGC discussions that we've already had this afternoon, where the Muslim Brotherhood is a term that covers a whole range of groups, including, of course, depending on how you want to consider it, Hamas itself. Where there is a violent threat to the UK, then we will, of course, take prescription action as necessary.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement, and I condemn the violent oppression of the Iranian people. Will the Minister join me in paying tribute to the work of the BBC World Service and the BBC Persian Service, both in getting free journalism and the truth into that country, and also getting their stories of bravery and courage and suffering out to the wider world?
Minister.
I will. BBC World Service and indeed BBC Persian are a lifeline, as so many other of the World Service channels are, and I pay tribute to the vital work that they do in reporting even amongst the most difficult circumstances.
Sven Opsejekti.
Deputy Speaker. If I may, I just wanted to return to the topic of Craig and Lindsay Foreman. The Minister will obviously be aware that they've now been in prison for over a year and are currently in Evin prison, regarded as the harshest prison in Iran. Since the outbreak of violence in Iran in recent weeks, can he just give us an update in the House as to their medical condition, and can he give us any assurances in terms of the current medical condition and the last time he was informed of their medical condition, whether they are currently still safe?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure the honourable gentleman will appreciate I don't want to provide too much personal information to the House, but I can confirm that we have had consular access relatively recently, and I've spoken to the families, I think, twice since the protests began. They're very much at the foremost of my mind.
Jonathan Davies.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. These scenes from Iran are absolutely barbaric, and those executions that we are aware of are an affront to human dignity. But often wherever you look around the world, you see the malign influence of Iran, including here. And our own National Security Strategy published in June last year highlighted that. So can the Minister assure me that our law enforcement is taking every step possible to manage that risk? And if I may, just following on from the question raised by my honourable friend, the member for Rugby, perhaps he would like to make a contribution to the BBC Charter Review consultation in respect of the very positive work that the BBC is doing in that troubled part of the world.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for the question. The Foreign Office obviously has a special relationship with the BBC, given our role in the World Service, which we have talked about already in this session. And I can confirm to the House that law enforcement is making full use of the powers afforded them, including under the National Security Act of 2023, and it's under that Act that there has been recent arrests in May of last year of those associated with potential violence.
Manuela Pertigala.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents have contacted me sick with worry. They have not heard from their loved ones for over a week. And there are reports of tens of thousands of citizens being killed now, but the number could be higher because of the deliberate communication blackout. So this is now an international human rights emergency. Will the government now act faster on the proscription of the IRGC, and will the minister support stronger diplomatic consequences for this brutal regime? Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've discussed the IRGC prescription process, and I don't have very much further to add on the more detailed timing questions she's seeking to press me on. On diplomatic consequences, I've set out some of the actions we have taken in recent days, and I imagine we'll have more to tell the House shortly, including in FCDO orals tomorrow.
Chris Finns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The scenes that we see in Iran are obviously absolutely terrible. I'm also concerned about the impact that the ongoing situation in Iran is going to have on safety in this country as well. So can I ask the Minister to pass on my thanks to the Foreign Secretary for her decision in her previous role to list Iran under the enhanced tier of foreign influence registration scheme, but can I ask him to be specific as to what difference this will make?
Minister.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. Putting Iran on the FIRS regime means that there is a new offence of seeking to act on behalf of the Iranian regime in the UK without properly so declaring. That means that it is harder for people to do this in this country without exposing them to the force of law enforcement. And as I said to my honourable friend from Derbyshire in the last answer, UK law enforcement has proven itself capable of finding these people and ensuring prosecutions.
Chris Coughlin.
There have been many calls across the chamber for sanctions and to prescribe the IRGC, which I fully support. But I think we need to be honest that those measures are unlikely to save the lives of protesters from a regime in fear of its survival. But I would point out, however, that the drone strikes against Soleimani, the head of the IRGC in 2020, did influence Iranian behaviour. And an aspect of these protests is that they follow Western military intervention. And as the honourable member pointed out, the US President has explicitly called for them to overthrow the regime. This reminds me of the 1991 Shia uprisings in Iraq, when President Bush did exactly the same in the aftermath of the Gulf War and left them aside to be massacred by Saddam Hussein's helicopter gunships. Is the Minister considering this legacy in his deliberations?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, across the Middle East, I'm reluctant to focus on a particular incident in the long and, I'm afraid, fraught history of both interventions and violence that follows. But of course, we're considering the broader history of the wider region as we consider our response.
Dr. Ali Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I share the horror expressed by colleagues from across the House at the brutal, repressive crackdown on protesters in Iran, and I'd like to pay tribute particularly to the bravery of women protesters, in particular, fighting for their rights. Among the many concerning stories now emerging is testimony of the use of sexual assault as a weapon of repression. Can I ask the Minister, is this something specifically that he and the Foreign Secretary raised in their interactions with representatives of the Iranian regime recently? And can he set out in more detail to the House the timetable for next steps, including implementation of the additional sanctions that the Foreign Secretary referred to last week?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can confirm to the House that the Iranian representatives were left in no doubt about the strength of our views. These were not terribly long conversations, so we weren't able to get into the full detail of our concerns, and I don't have very much more I can add on the timing of further sanctions.
Martin Wrigley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For me, this is personal. This reminds me of what I saw when I was in Tehran nearly 50 years ago at the beginning of the revolution. My father was appointed naval attaché to the British Embassy in Tehran before and during the revolution, and we saw some awful things. What kept us going when the nights were cold, the power was off, the phones were cut, the guns were going off outside, and people were demonstrating on rooftops nearby, was the British World Service broadcasting where we could rely on that information. What extra support is the Minister giving the BBC to make sure that the World Service and BBC Persian is boosted in that area to get the information through, to give them that lifeline that I had before I took the last flight out before Khomeini arrived back?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for the question, and I hope he won't mind if I also pay tribute to the fact he was I hope he doesn't mind me saying, a diplomat brat. And I know from my own service, as I know many in the House will be familiar with, it's often families, particularly in circumstances like that, and it's families of the diplomatic service now who often face the same worries and the same hardships of diplomats in difficult positions. That was obviously very much on our mind as we considered the position of the embassy in Tehran last week, and it continues to be on our mind across the world where our brave diplomats face situations of peril. In relation to his generous words about the World Service, I echo them, and I can confirm that we are thinking about how the World Service can be ensured, its future can be ensured so that it can continue to provide the vital functions that it does.
Sarah Perchin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the horrific scenes we saw in London over the weekend of pro-democracy protesters being attacked by the police, what steps will the Minister take to ensure that peaceful protests can take place in this country?
Minister.
We completely support peaceful protest, but it is also true that diplomatic premises are subject to particular protections under the law. That applies in London as it does indeed in Tehran. There is a balance here, and I was in discussions with the Security Minister through the weekend to ensure that we get it right.
Jess Brown-Fuller.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there were so many people killed, they were hosing the blood down the street using fire engines. Was the message coming out of my constituent's hometown. She has no idea if her mum and dad in Iran are safe during the communication blackout. When she asks me, as she no doubt will, why won't the government do everything they can to prescribe the IRGC, what would the Minister have me tell her?
Minister.
Firstly, the anguish that I'm sure her constituent is suffering, and so many constituents that will be in correspondence with MPs across the House, I cannot imagine how I would feel when my own loved ones in a situation where communications was not certain. I feel it in relation to our consular cases, and I know that it's felt by people right across the country. We will do everything that we can, both to try and ensure that the protesters are able to enjoy their rights, and indeed that the communications restrictions are lifted. Iran has plunged into darkness since the 8th of January, as Afghanistan plunged into darkness last year. This is a malign trend which we oppose completely, and we will do everything we can to see that it is as temporary in Iran as it proved to be in Afghanistan.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his answers? The Minister will be under no illusion as to the barbaric tactics that are currently being employed. Indeed, last week's statement made it very clear that government is fully aware the strongly worded condemnation has not brought about any change. We have British citizens incarcerated and in danger. The IRGC have killed thousands. They've shot them in the head, the neck and the face. It's been a shoot-to-kill policy by the IRGC. So what discussions has the Minister had with the United States of America, who promised physical action to show Iran that the safety of our citizens in this nation and protect the Iranian citizens as well against the sustained terrorism and recent abhorrent actions will no longer be tolerated, and physical action against the IRGC on the ground is what is needed.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've discussed already our attitude towards the protests. We are not threatening physical action against the IRGC in Tehran. What we want to see them do, and indeed the whole of the Iranian regime, is respect the rights of their people in accordance with international norms, ensure that the protesters can exercise their rights and lift these restrictions on the internet.
And that concludes the urgent question, and I'll give a few moments for the front benches to swap over.